Foreign Minister Roberto Alvarez, Vice Ministers from the Foreign Ministry, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, colleagues in diplomatic service. I'm really very, very pleased to be here today in your company at this event which the Diplomatic School has organized, because it has brought together all of us who are united in the choice of diplomacy as our chosen career. Now, in my own diplomatic experience, currently at 46 years, I have also listened, sitting there, to various thinkers and practitioners of diplomacy who have shared their insights and their experiences. And many of them were from regions and cultures different from my own. And I must say that over a period of time, they helped to broaden my perspective. I therefore very much hope that today's session too would be approached and perceived in that same spirit, that we would have at the conclusion of my talk an open and energetic conversation on the issues of the day. Now, to start that off, let me offer my thoughts on three themes. One, how does India approach the world and secure its growing global interests? Two, more specifically, how is India engaging Latin America? And three, what should India, today's India and tomorrow's India, mean to you? Now, like any other country, India's most pressing priorities are obviously in its neighborhood. Given its size and economic strength, it is very much for the collective benefit that India takes a generous and non-reciprocal approach to cooperation with smaller neighbors. And that's exactly what we have done in the last decade under Prime Minister Modi. And this, in our region, has come to be known as the Neighborhood First policy. It has seen a dramatic expansion in connectivity, in contacts, in cooperation across the region. The exception to this, of course, is Pakistan in view of the cross-border terrorism that it supports. But whether it is the COVID challenge or more recent debt pressures, India has always stepped up for its neighbors. The case of Sri Lanka, where it has extended more than $4 billion of economic support, is notable recently. Beyond South Asia, India is developing the concept of extended neighborhoods in all directions. With the ASEAN, this has taken the form of what we call the Act East policy that has opened up a pathway to a deeper engagement with the Indo-Pacific that is being pursued, amongst others, through a mechanism called the Quad. Towards the West, there has been a perceptible intensification of India's relationship with the Gulf and with the Middle East. One reflection of that is a new grouping called I2U2, comprising of India, Israel, UAE, and USA. These two regions on either side have emerged as major trade and investment hubs for India. About 8 million Indians live and work in the Gulf. But the relationship is much more than economic. It encompasses security, technology, and strong people-to-people ties. To the south, the outlook that shapes India's thinking goes by the acronym of SAGAR. This is an Indian word for oceans. For the first time in 2015, Prime Minister Modi articulated a comprehensive view that spanned the entirety of the Indian Ocean and its islands. These subsequently became the building block for the Indo-Pacific vision that emerged thereafter. To the north, India has been similarly pursuing a strategy of connecting to Central Asia more effectively, and this has taken the form of structured engagements across multiple domains. These concentric circles of priority give you a conceptual sense of Indian diplomacy, and one that we have pursued very assiduously over the last decade. But at a higher level, we are also practicing the approach of engaging all major centers of power. Such multi-alignment reflects the reality of multipolarity. Obviously, each engagement has its own particular weight and focus, but whether it is the United States, Europe, Russia, or Japan, we are trying to ensure that all these ties advance without seeking exclusivity. China falls in a somewhat different category because of the boundary dispute and the currently abnormal nature of our ties. That is an outcome of a violation of agreements regarding border management by them. The rise of China and India in a parallel time frame is also not without its competitive aspects. When India looks at other regions, be it Africa, the Pacific, or Latin America, much of what is happening can be explained as the emergence of India's potential global footprint. In many cases, it is the result of autonomous forces such as business or mobility. In others, it is part of a more considered strategy of deeper engagement. As an illustration, in recent years, we have opened 18 new embassies in Africa alone. Our development partnership today covers 78 countries and is reflected in almost 600 projects globally. I will address our engagement with Latin America separately. While much of the diplomacy is understandably bilateral, let me emphasize that India has always been a staunch votary of multilateralism. We believe that this is fundamental to the maintenance of global order. Our contributions have been significant over the years, especially in peacekeeping. The challenge, however, is the resistance to reforming multilateralism, particularly the working of the United Nations and its bodies. The longer this carries on, the weaker multilateralism will become. One sign of that is the growth of minilateralism and plurilateralism. More countries are going to find arrangements among themselves on pressing issues when they find that the United Nations cannot rise to a challenge. Overall, India is a nation that is deeply committed to promoting collective solutions for global good. Our presidency of the G20 this year is devoted to focusing on the real challenges to global development and global growth. Allow me now to say a few words about India's engagement with Latin America. In the last decade, there has been a conscious deepening of this process. We have had 33 high-level visits from India to the region, 6 each at the level of President and Vice President, and 4 at the level of Prime Minister. In turn, we have hosted 37 high-level dignitaries, 7 at the level of President. 2 new embassies have been opened, one in the Dominican Republic and one in Paraguay. But the real story is the economic one. Our trade with Latin America is today approaching a volume of $50 billion. Our exports to Brazil at $6.48 billion is more than that to Japan at $6.18 billion. That to Mexico at $4.43 billion is more than to Canada at $3.7 billion. In fact, even with the Dominican Republic, our exports at $329 million is more than some ASEAN partners like Cambodia. There is also a surge in investments, most notably in the energy sector. India today imports crude from Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and Guyana. Our presence in sectors like IT, pharmaceuticals, and two-wheelers is increasingly visible. Not least, Indian companies are engaged in project and enterprises from power transmission and road building to agriculture and mining. The political engagement is also growing in parallel. Since 2016, we have a structured engagement with CELAC. I held the last meeting with its Troika in September 2022. Similarly, there is an arrangement to regularly interact with both CARICOM and SICA. In fact, on this current visit, I participated in both these exercises at the level of foreign ministers. India is an associate member of the Pacific Alliance and has a preferential trade agreement with Mercosur since 2009. The fact is that deeper globalization and a broadening of India's interests, Latin America is no longer considered a region too far. So what does all of this mean to you? Or if I can put it somewhat differently, where should, possibly where does India feature in your calculations? Let me give you 10 reasons why you need to pay greater attention to our relationship. 1, as the 5th largest economy currently, likely to become the 3rd perhaps by the end of the decade, our economic presence will be more strongly felt in this region. Indian goods and services will be more visible, and our demand for resources from this continent will grow commensurately. Both as a producer and as a consumer, India will matter more to you. Second, not just as the most populous country, but also one of growing skills and talent, we are becoming increasingly central to the global workplace. This is especially so in the era of a knowledge economy. Already, a number of countries are seeking mobility agreements to this end. 34 million Indians and people of Indian origin live and work abroad. That number will only grow further with the passage of time. Third, the big change of our era is the digital revolution. In recent years, India has built on a digital backbone to transform governance and ensure delivery of public goods and services. Side by side, it has had a revolutionary impact on business, including health, education, innovation, and retail. It has enabled the rapid creation of a social safety net on a scale that could not even be contemplated earlier. Today, India is executing programs whose beneficiaries number approximately the populations of many major countries, sometimes even continents. This democratization of technology has also led to an empowerment with deep social consequences. In that sense, India's digital experience holds lessons for the world. 4, a parallel story is taking place in the domain of health. The COVID period underlined India's true potential in this regard. We supplied vaccines to almost 100 countries, many of them as the first provider, and enhanced quantity of medicines to 150 countries, including many developed ones. But on a more lasting basis, India is emerging as an example of affordable and accessible healthcare, including for populations at low income levels. 5, another big change is in climate action. Since COP21 in Paris, we are steadfastly discharging our responsibility of being a climate leader. the growth of renewables, the impact of energy efficiency, and the consequence of lifestyle changes have truly been remarkable. The big ideas in this domain are also coming out of India, such as the International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, and the proposal which Prime Minister Modi tabled in Glasgow of what he called One Sun, One World, One Grid. Even India's advocacy of millets this year as a food for greater consumption in the world has very strong climate implications. In a world that is more self-obsessed, India has also stepped into the role of a first responder in humanitarian assistance and disaster rescue situations. Initially, this was largely in our immediate neighborhood on occasions like the Yemen civil war or the Nepal earthquake. More recently, it was visible during the Turkey earthquake. 7, shaping global debates to ensure a more inclusive approach is another big issue of our times. Historically, India has been deeply committed to the well-being and progress of the global South. As we assumed the G20 presidency, Prime Minister Modi decided to consult 125 nations to ensure that we spoke for this larger constituency on the pressing issues of the day, and Minister, you participated in that exercise. 8, in the aftermath of COVID and the Ukraine conflict, it is clear that the globalization model of the last 2 decades is now simply too risky. We are excessively dependent on a single geography. To de-risk the global economy, there is a search for more reliable and resilient supply chains. In the digital domain, there is a parallel emphasis on promoting trust and transparency. We have the potential to be one more engine of growth for the global economy. 9, as globalization unfolds and multipolarity emerges, the process of rebalancing among countries, cultures, and regions also gathers strength. This was initially apparent in the economic domain, now more so in the political domain, but its cultural manifestation is no less significant. The world will become more democratic and more diverse with the passage of time, and India's culture, heritage, and traditions will make their due contribution. Yoga, perhaps, is a good example to reflect on, a very obvious one. And finally, and I have deliberately kept it to the end to emphasize this point, in a world where values and beliefs are much more deeply appreciated, the significance of India's democracy cannot be overstated. And I therefore thank you, Minister, particularly for making that point. Today, we can say that India is not just a democracy, but it is a democracy that delivers. And it draws on its own consultative and inclusive traditions to do so. Do appreciate that India's democratic choice has had truly global repercussions, and therefore, so does its success. So let me conclude by underlining that we live in a more volatile and uncertain world. There are 2 big contradictions of our times. One is the polarization between the East and the West. The other is the divide between the North and the South. India has a bridging role in both. Its ability to engage multiple and competing interests makes its position relatively unique. To varying degrees, that too serves as an example. So I hope that these remarks have given you all some food for thought. I would be delighted to respond to your comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Agradecemos la exponencial disertación del señor ministro Jaishankar y abrimos este espacio de preguntas y respuestas. Si alguien tiene alguna pregunta, por favor. Allá, el equipo de protocolo, si me puede asistir, al fondo.
Gracias. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Minister. My question is, as you indicated that India wants to achieve a real change in G20 as president, how you intend to do that all the countries that is in the G20 applies the sustainable agenda in the economy? Thank you.
Si puedes repetir la pregunta, por favor.
Okay.
Yes,
my
of
question
course.
is, as you indicated, okay, it's okay, I can do it. My question is, as you indicated that India wants to apply a real change as the G20 presidency, how you pretend or attend to do that all those economies apply an economy agenda sustainable for like a model for action?
Sure. I think as all of you know, we took over the G20 presidency at the end of last year from Indonesia. The focus of the G20, the mandate of the G20, is really to promote global development and growth and address challenges to them. And I think the challenges which our young colleague pointed out are the most pressing ones. Issues about economic distress and concerns about the sustainability, not just of growth, but sustainability of the planet itself. Our effort today in the G20 presidency is actually to get the group to look at these very issues. Now, we understand that there are many other things which are happening in the world. We fully acknowledge the gravity of those issues. But the fact is, different issues have different forums that are appropriate to address them and to debate them. G20 is supposed to focus on growth and development. So we would like it, and we are seeking in the multiple tracks of the G20 to get it to focus on energy security, food security, and fertilizer security, because those are three very pressing concerns. Another big issue today is the debt situation of many countries, not just the least developed countries, but also some middle-income countries. There are concerns about trade disruption and the resilience of supply chain. There is a pressing need for reforming the multilateral development banks and stretching their capital to encourage more lending. And when it comes to climate action, also to find more concessional ways of making climate finance available. So these are the issues, and it is precisely because we have the desire to get the G20 to be on the right track and looking at these issues that we did the consultation that I spoke about, what we call the Voice of the Global South, and engaged 125 countries of the Global South, so that we had a consolidated sense of their concerns. And a lot of what we are articulating today in the G20 is actually the result of that exercise.
Muchas gracias. ¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Good afternoon. Okay. My name is Daniel, and I would like to make a question. I am aware that India is one of the biggest democracies in the world, as they need to give access to each eligible citizen to fulfill this right. You mentioned that over 2 million Indians live in the Middle East. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You mentioned that over 2 million Indians live in the Middle East.
8.
Oh, that's a bigger number. Around 3 million Dominicans live abroad as well, and our legislation gives them the right to vote. Does the Indian legislation also provide those Indians who live abroad the right to vote? And if so, how do you manage that?
We have Indian nationals and people of Indian origin who live abroad. I make a distinction because when we say people of Indian origin, they are people who have taken other nationalities. Roughly, this number is 34 million. You can say maybe they are half and half. Maybe 20 million are people of Indian origin and about 14, 15 million are Indian nationals. Obviously, the people who have taken other nationalities in my country are not eligible to vote. But they are eligible to become what we call an overseas citizen, which means they get many of the legal rights of an Indian citizen, but not the right to vote and not certain economic and legal rights which our citizens normally enjoy. Where our nationals are concerned, we have the question of how do they vote when elections take place and they live abroad is an issue. We have not taken a decision about setting up voting centers abroad. That is not something that we have ever done. There are many reasons for it, including the numbers involved, as you can understand. But what happens, in India, it's very interesting because often we get these debates about how is democracy doing, do people really believe in it, is the public faith going down? I can tell you, if you want to see some society, any society where democracy is thriving, it's doing well, the people's faith is strong, in fact getting stronger, you should come to India during an election. Or, in any parameter you use, the percentage of people voting, the number of women voting, the number of, I would say, disadvantaged or discriminated sections historically who today come to exercise their choice. By every parameter, there is a greater and greater participation in the democratic exercise. And in fact, because there is a lot of internal mobility in India, people also often vote from, where they are eligible by a postal vote as well. So the short answer to your question is no, we do not have a mechanism for people voting abroad, but the additional volunteered answer from my side is it is a place where people value their vote. There is a perception that who they elect can make a real change in society. And I think the pace of change in the last 10 years has given really the public a great deal of faith and belief in the democratic system.
Muchas gracias. Les recordamos que pueden hacer sus preguntas en español ya que contamos con traducción simultánea. Una pregunta más, por favor.
Hello, good afternoon again. One more time, Your Excellency, Minister Jaishankar, welcome again to the Dominican Republic. And as I said this morning, coming from India, the land of the Veda with the greatest knowledge of life, it's extremely important to know how India, or which strategy, and as I told you this morning, I have lived in India, so I quite well know the country, how India is planning to have stronger approach with Latin America, specifically Dominican Republic and Latin America in general. What is your strategy to more engagement, more students go to India, more Indians coming here, exchange of culture, how you being the land of yoga, how can you work for peace? How can you intervene not only Ukraine, Russia, South Sudan, Myanmar, Yemen, and so many conflicts, but specifically Russia, Ukraine. Russia has been your partner since the 1970s. And how can you approach peace and how can you work into more organic agriculture and engagement in sustainability, which I know India is doing a great effort, and we hope to see Narendra Modi in Dominican Republic.
Okay, I broke up your question into 3 parts: yoga, Ukraine, and Latin America. Okay, so let me start with the yoga, because you know in 2014 when Prime Minister Modi became Prime Minister, I was at that time ambassador in Washington DC. He had come on a visit to the UN General Assembly and to Washington. And that was when he first brought up the idea of an International Day of Yoga. To be very honest, I don't think any of us in the room had quite thought about it the way he did. And the way he did was that yoga was a very good example of how a tradition or a culture has spread across the world. In many cases, it has got localized. It has taken different forms. But it is a great binding factor. It's a great uniting factor. And the next year, we moved the UN to pass a resolution on this. I must say we got unanimous support from all members. And from 2015, if you could see, actually the global celebration of yoga has been more and more widespread. In fact, last year we had a series of events so that as the sun rose, and we do this on June 21st, as the sun rose on the international date line, starting from there, we tracked yoga events right through the world till really the end of the date line, you could say. Now, I'm saying this to you partly to encourage you on June 21st, all of you, to turn up for the yoga event, which I'm sure the ambassador will enthusiastically organize. But also because often, there is a lot in our culture and our traditions which can make a real difference. During COVID, during COVID, we saw a lot of people in deep stress or depression or, a sense of being constrained. And you actually had a much greater interest in wellness practices, in actually not just physical fitness, but a comprehensive physical, psychological, mental. So I know this is an international relations talk, and I'm giving some health advice here. But I point this out to you as a subject where actually international cooperation has helped propagate yoga. And it's the same spirit with which today we are approaching millets. Millets is a food grain which very large parts of the world ate before rice or wheat came into their lives. There is today a growing food shortage. The consumption of the world is not keeping pace with the food grain production. And to the extent that, something, healthier and something which requires less water, which is more carbon friendly, is expanded, its production is expanded, that's probably good for the world. So that's your first answer. Your second answer on Ukraine, it's a large part of the world, of the roughly 200 countries in the world, I think the overwhelming sentiment in the world today is for peace, It is for an end to the fighting. It is to a return to the negotiations. But the truth is also it is easier said than done. So what we have done as a country, my Prime Minister has often been in touch with the presidents of Russia and Ukraine on this subject. We have also diplomatically tried to help any initiative which in some way, however partially, contributes to an improvement in the situation. This could be like the Black Sea grain corridor or the efforts today to ensure the flow of fertilizers or ensure the safety of the nuclear power plant which is in the conflict zone. So I think it's we need the countries who are concerned, rightly concerned about this, need to keep making those efforts because it is not something we can ever afford to give up on. Your third issue, Latin America, I partly addressed it in my remarks, but I do want to say this. Look, the Indian economy, a $3.5 trillion economy, which is going to grow between, 6.5% to 8-9%. It's going to make a global impact. This is not rocket science. I mean, after all, you saw this in the last decade or two with China. So the fact is that with every decade or half a decade, the presence of India in some form, the economic presence of India, as I said, as a consumer, as a producer, as a contributor, that is going to grow. So my challenge today as Foreign Minister is having been brought up with a belief that some regions of the world are very far away, which in a globalized and a technology-driven world is not anymore the case. How do I encourage an understanding of this region? How do we have those exchanges which you talk about, which we really believe in? So one of the, I would say, conclusions of my own visit this time is to go back and see whether with CARICOM or with SICA or with CELAC, how do we put in place more sustained exchanges in different domains so that we actually have a direct experience of each other. And the direct experience makes a difference. I mean, the 4 countries that I have traveled to on this trip, each one of them is being visited by an Indian foreign minister for the first time. And I can tell you that at the end of my visit, I would carry away an understanding and empathy, which I would not have got despite my best intent by sitting in Delhi and reading my briefing books. So there is no substitute for physical interaction, for exchanges, and that is something that we will be putting an emphasis on.
Muchas gracias. Recibiremos una última pregunta, ya que por cuestiones de tiempo estamos un poco retrasados. El equipo de protocolo, por favor, si me asiste. El director Ricardo.
Okay, I'll take both of you back to back. So if you can both give me your questions, I'll give you a short answer.
Thank you, Excellency. So my question is, given the historical relationship between India and African countries, so given the diaspora India has, I'd like to know if you have any recommendation for the Dominican Republic about how can we improve, how can we strengthen the bilateral relationship between the DR and African countries.
Okay. Gracias. La pregunta mía es sobre energía. La India tiene una gran cantidad de plantas nucleares y actualmente en Europa algunos países como Alemania han desmontado su sistema de energía nuclear para uso civil. Me gustaría saber qué experiencias podría compartir con nosotros y con que queremos en República Dominicana llegar a utilizar en algún momento este tipo de energías. Queremos saber de qué manera el gobierno de la India pudo manejar ese temor con sus ciudadanos para así poder nosotros quizás, a partir de su experiencia, poder implementar esas opciones. Gracias.
Thank you. On Africa, you know, we have steadily expanded our diplomatic presence. I think, if my memory serves me right, out of 54 African countries, I think we have 46 embassies, some 46 or 47 embassies. Okay. But we did it stage by stage. So it's not possible for a country to suddenly, you know, be everywhere. So a part of the problem is to break it up into regions and create, you know, embassies with concurrent accreditations. But as I said, you know, at the end of the day, it's important to have a presence on the ground. However small an embassy, having a resident ambassador, having even a concurrent ambassador, having people, staff, our diplomats live there, gives you a feel which, you know, is very, very difficult to get on paper. So I know, you know, not every country has its own challenges, it has its budget, it has its people. So, you know, our solution will not necessarily apply to you. But I would say, to the extent possible, you know, there is a reason why in history countries sent out envoys. You know, the reason is they wanted people to go there and, you know, see it and smell it and think it and experience it, and that's good judgment. Because at the end of the day, our business is about judgment. And judgment is partly cultural, part of it is you know, an understanding of the people you are dealing with. So I am by nature inclined to recommend setting up embassies, at least for my own country, and I try very hard as foreign minister to increase that. On the nuclear issue, look, I think different countries have made their judgment about the viability and the risks and the benefits of nuclear energy. The Germans have done theirs. I mean, very frankly, our judgment is very different. We are growing our nuclear energy program. We are setting up more reactors. We do believe today that if you look at climate change as a very major challenge, that nuclear reactors, nuclear energy is part of that solution. But having said that, I accept that one of the issues there is exactly the point you made, which is, you know, after Fukushima, there is a certain public trepidation on this. I think you have to engage the public. You have to, you know, tell them that, look, that was a different situation. There were some very peculiar coming together of circumstances. So, you know, nobody said governance is easy. I mean, it's part of the governance responsibility to go out there and engage the public and often, you know, spend time with them and persuade them on very sensitive and tricky issues.